Hello world! Hi, this is Max again. Thank you for coming back to my second video, and I apologize for the long hiatus. I've been going through a number of things, but thank God it's all good. And God willing, I hope that I can make my videos more regularly from now on. One change I'm making is that I'm going to be doing away with the janky keynote slides I've done with my commentaries. Also, I'm going to make my videos shorter, which I think more people might appreciate anyway. But I hope that this means that I'll be able to produce these videos faster and in a more timely manner. But otherwise, I'm sticking to my concept of responding to videos I found on YouTube, in particular those regarding science and faith. So this time, I've chosen to respond to a video featuring Mr. Dan Barker, who, according to Wikipedia, is an atheist activist who used to be an evangelical preacher. This is a video of him speaking at an Oxford Union event in 2012. It is part of a longer series of debates at the Union, and I think it might be useful to continue responding to other videos in the series. But please do let me know if you think I should try to respond to other videos or to talk about something else. As I mentioned earlier, I want to make my videos shorter, so I think I will not attempt to respond to the entire video in one go, and instead, I will break it up into multiple sections. However, I will post a link to the full video in the information section below so that you can check it out in its entirety at your own time. As usual, I will play through the video and I will pause it as and when I have something to interject. As a disclaimer, I would just like to remind everyone that these are my views, not necessarily shared by the church I'm currently attending or anyone else. Also, I am not a Bible scholar, but someone who professes Jesus as my Lord and Savior, who also happens to love and work in science. Okay, let us begin.
I used to believe in God, like our very articulate and eloquent speaker before us. I used to believe firmly in God. I was an ordained minister. I preached the gospel for 19 years. I felt this presence in my mind as I prayed. I got goosebumps as I was in communion with what I thought was the Holy Spirit of God. As I read the Holy Bible and read about the resurrection of Jesus, I dedicated my life to preaching that gospel that I thought was so real, that gave so much meaning, so much hope, so much beauty to the world. But I've changed my mind. I now know I was deluded. I was having a very real, very powerful, but mental experience that happens in most religions.
There is actually a lot to unpack here. But before that, I would just like to say that my first reaction when I heard of Mr. Barker's history is a mixture of sadness and gladness. Sadness because I can only imagine the kind of pain he had to go through to go from loving God to such an extent that he was willing to devote a significant portion of his life to God to totally rejecting him. But I am glad that it seemed like he had recovered from the experience and has moved on with his life. However, I do want to respond to a point that Mr. Barker brought up, or sort of implied, that the religious experience he had as a Christian was not very valid because people from other religions can experience something similar. Now, what I'd really like to find out first is what basis he had for saying this. Had he tried out many other religions personally? And so can he attest that he had encountered the same experiences in all of them? Can such experiments be done realistically without any biases? However, I actually have no problems believing that people from all religions, or even those without any religion, can experience some kind of spiritual transcendence. How similar they are? Well, that I will question. The reason that I do not dispute this is because there is a God spot or God center in our brain that can allow man to achieve this heightened sense of being. For some people, this is evidence enough that man sort of made up the whole concept of God and religions. I can also sort of see the logic in this argument. But for me, I think it's also possible to say that God had designed man to have this God center in the brain because man was designed to worship and love God. One such claim in the Bible is in Isaiah 43, verses 20 to 21. For I give water in the wilderness, rivers in the desert, to give drink to my chosen people, the people whom I formed for myself, that they might declare my praise. So the fact that there are ways to trigger the brain in this way, well, I'm just not surprised. So it comes down to a matter of whether one believes that nature is as it is because God designed it so, or that God and faith exists because nature is as it is. Well, I will talk more about my ideas on biology and faith in a future episode, but I will leave this as it is right now.
I won't tell you my whole story, but I went through a process of deconversion that took 4 or 5 years, starting as a firm believer, evangelical, street preacher. In the foreword to my book, Godless, that tells that story, Richard Dawkins writes, Dan Barker was not just a preacher, he's the kind of preacher you would not want to sit next to on a bus. That was me. I was so convinced. I was so in love with Jesus, my Savior and my Lord. But I went through a process. Evangelical, fundamentalist, where I migrated into more of a moderate, where I preached less hell and more love, into more of a more liberal stage in my life, until eventually I dumped out all the bathwater and I found out there's no baby there. It's just words, it's just arguments. From the very articulate words we heard tonight, we didn't see any dots connected. We heard a lot of argument, but when it comes to evidence, only 2 pieces were offered, which we will probably get to: personal experience and the resurrection of Jesus. If nothing comes from nothing, then God cannot exist, because God is not nothing. If that premise is true, that nothing comes from nothing, and if God is something, then you've just shot yourself in the foot.
If nothing comes from nothing, how did the Big Bang get started? Did nothingness suddenly just spontaneously explode into creating the whole universe? Well, I'm not an astrophysicist, so I will leave this here. However, I find this sort of argument only useful as thought experiments, because it really isn't that relevant with regards to how we relate to God. All the Bible tells us is that God created our world from nothing, and there wasn't any account of how God himself came into being. If God is a spiritual being that is beyond time and space as we know it, it means that God exists beyond a dimension that we can perceive. So, while there might be nothing in this universe, in this world before God created it, it does not mean that God could not have already existed in another dimension or realm that he is in.
Today is Thursday. What does that mean, Mr. President? Thursday. What does it mean? It's the day that millions of people believed in the god Thor. There was a gap in understanding. There was a mystery. What is that noise in the sky? What are those lights? What is all this? What is that? It must be an agency. It must be some being or something, and they named it Thor. And today we have a day of the week. We don't have a Jesus day, but we do have a Thor's day that millions of people believed in, and maybe some still do. But that deity has found itself on the scrap heap of history, just like when I looked at the deity I used to believe in, the God of the Bible. It started for me with the simple idea that Jesus told a parable about the prodigal son. A parable is what? It's a fiction. It doesn't matter if the prodigal son actually existed in history. It was the moral tale that mattered. The ancient Israelites made up a parable or a metaphor about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and a talking snake. Look up in the dictionary the word fable. You will find it as a moral tale involving talking animals. We know that Adam and Eve could not have existed because of evolution. I assume everyone in this room accepts the solid fact of the evolution of the human species. So Adam and Eve could not have been real people. It was a metaphor, and many Christians accept that fact. They know there's metaphor, figures of speech in the Bible. But in my process, if the prodigal son is a fabrication, If Adam and Eve are a metaphor, then what about this other character, this Yahweh, this Jehovah, this Elohim character? Where do you draw the line? When we know that humans are very good at inventing myths, like the turtle in my Native American ancestry, the turtle that swam across the waters, brought up the mud from the bottom, created the continents. A beautiful story, a wonderful metaphor, but that didn't really happen. The God character himself is also one of those fictions I came to realize. Maybe a useful fiction, maybe it gave meaning, maybe it gave hope, maybe it gave purpose. A fiction nonetheless.
I had to pause a little when thinking about this response, because on the surface, it seems like Mr. Barker is suggesting that just because the Bible contains multiple parables and metaphors, that God might not actually be real. That is just not a logical argument. I mean, I can write a book about the stories told by my grandfather, and it will all be fictional, but it does not mean that my grandfather is not a real person. But regardless, my response to his question of where do we draw the line is actually whether you trust the Bible that God is real and not fictional. The good thing is that there is good historical and archaeological reasons to believe that the Bible is real, although people will also present evidences to the contrary. And since I'm no Bible scholar nor historian, I think I will leave it to each individual to decide for themselves whether they want to have faith in the Bible.
The reason I am a non-believer today is because of the lack of evidence and argument for a deity. If there were any real evidence for a God, then by now someone should have won the Nobel Prize for pointing that out. Any scientist in the world would jump at the chance to say, here we go. I mean, if there is a hitherto unknown force of the cosmos that we haven't yet been able to determine, what scientist in the world would not love to make that point? That hasn't been done yet.
Well, I won't disagree that any scientist would like to be able to say that they have definitive proof that God is real. Well, okay, I guess if we do not consider Jesus' life and death and resurrection on earth as empirical proof, then yeah, it would be hard to prove that God is real. I mean, because as I explained earlier, God exists beyond our physical realm. So unless you have some kind of instrument that can probe into God's neighborhood, you will not be able to find anything. So it feels like it is decidedly inconvenient that Jesus came to earth more than 2,000 years ago when there were no cameras, no internet, nor any other kind of media where we can live stream his sermons, witness his death on the cross and his resurrection in front of the entire world. So we have no choice but to have faith in the Bible that Jesus did come to earth and did all that. However, it all feels like the fact that we can only see and experience God through faith is also by design. And it is also stated in the Bible. Think about it this way. If science can prove that God exists, where is the need for faith? It is as if God purposefully planned it such that we have no choice but to start with faith.
All we have are what we would call, and I think many believers call, God of the gap. The thunder and lightning was a gap that is now closed. The perhaps fine-tuning of the initial constants, perhaps the origin of the Big Bang. We do have some gaps in science. In fact, it is those gaps that drive science. Without those gaps, we wouldn't have scientific inquiry.
Well, thank you, Mr. Barker, for bringing up the Big Bang Theory. Here, he's trying to say that because man created supernatural beings to explain for phenomena that they don't understand, i.e. the God of the gaps idea, that there can't be a supernatural being who actually created the world. Well, this is a logical fallacy because if God did create the world, then it doesn't matter if science is able to explain away 1 million or 1 billion of these gaps, and disproved a million billions of the associated folklores and stories, none of it can do away with the fact that God created the world. Of course, from a logical atheist point of view, the fact that science has managed to close a lot of the gaps in our understanding of how the world works, it makes it seem like there is no need for a God to create the world, which is a fair argument. But just because it seems on the surface that the world came about because of a chain of certain natural events, it does not mean that God was not behind it. Is science able to disprove that there is a God? Just because natural processes can occur seemingly without supernatural intercession, this is not proof that there is no God. The same way that atheists argue against the God of the gaps idea, that because science can't explain a certain phenomenon right now, it doesn't mean that a scientific explanation for it does not exist. I would also argue that just because we cannot prove God with science right now, that God does not exist. Okay, I'm going to go on a slight tangent here to say that while it seems like I'm arguing for Christians to trust in God in spite of the lack of scientific evidences, I'm not asking people to be crazy QAnon followers. Please note that while we can't use current scientific methods to prove for God, it doesn't mean that there are no evidences for him, the Bible being the main thing. For other worldly, earth and human-based phenomena, I would say that I would need empirical evidences to verify the claims.
What we are offered with is faith and belief. And you were very eloquent in saying that you have a belief in a God, that what you believe is God. But belief is not knowledge. Belief is simply an assertion, according to the Bible, that you believers believe. Belief is the evidence of things not seen, the substance of things hoped for. Belief is not evidence. Anytime you have to accept an assertion by faith, you're admitting that that assertion cannot be accepted on its own merits. It doesn't have the strength to be accepted as any other, perhaps, scientific hypothesis would be taken.
Yep, there are many instances in the Bible where God asks man to have faith. It's clear that faith is a central tenet in our relationship with God. So I am not surprised that God has not made it possible for man to somehow stumble upon him in our experiments.
Do scientists gather together every Sunday morning in their scientific sanctuaries and bow their heads and sing, "Yes, the Higgs boson is real. I know in my heart the Higgs boson is real. I will have faith. I will be strong to this secular world who challenges my belief that the God particle is real. Amen." If they did such a thing, you would think they were pretty insecure on the concept, wouldn't you? That's what we find with faith, a constant puffing yourself up. Be strong, resist the world, believe in these absurdities in spite of the doubts.
It's interesting how Mr. Barker made the distinction here about what he understands as certainty in science as a contrast to the insecurities of faith. Well, what I would say is that what Mr. Barker might not realize is that faith is actually central to both science and religion. First, let me talk a little about faith with regards to science. It's pretty funny how Mr. Barker made it seem like scientists were so assured about the Higgs boson in 2012, which was when the video was made. The fact is that at that time, the scientists at CERN had just obtained the first glimpse of a particle in the collider that had the signatures of the theoretical Higgs boson. It was a major breakthrough for sure, but if you ask any of the scientists there, they would have told you that they needed more proof. In fact, I would not be surprised if a good number of them were actually praying to the gods of science that they get more certainty that they were not witnessing some weird artifact from their instruments or some sort of abnormality. Well, the good news is that years after that initial finding, more and more evidences were found that suggests that they had indeed found the Higgs boson. However, I think that what Mr. Barker said also showed how much trust and faith he has placed in the scientists at CERN that he might not have realized himself, because I am pretty sure that he would not have been able to replicate the Hadron Collider experiment himself and to verify that what CERN found was indeed the Higgs boson. He just had to take their word for it. So it actually requires some faith for anyone to really accept any of the outcomes as true, because we just have no way to verify any of the results ourselves. Well, the situation is slightly different with other sciences like biology, because we sometimes repeat these experiments as part of the process of building upon the knowledge we have already learned. And in doing so, we can verify for ourselves whether the results are replicable or not. This is how the science community work to verify scientific findings and how fake results from rogue scientists were uncovered. Well, but please note that while these rogue scientists do exist, you'll just have to trust me when I say that scientists in general are not like that. And so, even though I can't verify everything I read or learn about science, what I have faith in is that the system of scientific pursuit as a whole is trustworthy. After all, we can see for ourselves the outcomes of what science has brought us: electricity, aeroplanes, penicillin, the internet, etc., etc. So what I would say is that we can have faith in science because we can witness its outcomes. And personally, this is also why I can say my faith in the Bible grows each day. I might not be able to share a meal with Jesus more than 2,000 years ago, but the more I learn about God through the Bible and see the outcome of God's impact and transformation in my own life, the more I can have faith in Him. Okay, I hope I have not strayed too far from Mr. Barker's point right here. But in any case, I think I will draw this video to a close for now. There are more points to address in the next part of the video, so I better get to work soon. But before I stop, I just want to sum up some points from this video. Mr. Barker stated that one of the reasons why he stopped trusting in God is because there was a lack of evidence for the existence of a deity. Now, I can totally appreciate why some people put absolute faith on empirical evidences. I'm pretty much like that in my day-to-day life as well, except when it comes to God. In fact, it's also why I love the Bible, unexpectedly, because of how logical its teachings are and how the structure of the Bible makes so much sense. Still, it will not satisfy people who are only willing to trust in the empirical. All I can say is that if this is you, then you have better be 100% sure that there is nothing beyond what we can perceive, beyond what science is able to prove. Alright, that's it for this video. Please do not hesitate to comment or contact me if you have any queries about what I mentioned. I hope that what I said can provoke some thoughts in this area, and let's get a conversation going. Take care, God bless, and let's talk again soon.